Hi everyone, today I've got a video for you on price floors. That is, putting a floor price or minimum price on coffee in some way. This is something we used to hear more about over a year or so ago, when coffee prices were often lower than the cost of production or anything close to a living wage for most small producers of mild Arabica coffee. This is of course not talked about quite as much today, as prices have risen quite a lot in the last year. But I think the concept is still valid, especially given that the same market with the same forces that provided very low prices for quite a while is still the one that we're using today. I actually recorded this video about 18 months ago, and for whatever reason I forgot that I had done it, I never edited it, and I never posted it. I'm actually really glad that happened, because in the last 18 months I've learned a lot that's going to totally change my analysis and conclusion of whether price floors could or could not be something helpful. But while I'm sharing what I've learned, I'm also identifying my own biases and gaps in my own knowledge and working to try to question and fill these. So in today's video, I'm going to leave the initial part just as I had recorded it. You can see how young I looked back then. And then in the second part, we're going to apply a different analysis based on what I've learned in the last 18 months. All that is to say, if the first part of this video seems like pure finance bro economics, it's because it is, and we will fix it by the end. So here's the idea. The commodity coffee price is always rising and falling as time goes by. Let's say mild Arabica, or whatever quality, has a price that's higher, but also fluctuates based on the base commodity coffee price. Let's say it's this little dotted line right here. Let's say the solid black line is the C price, the dotted black line is mild Arabica. So these are always rising and falling. Let's say this red line here is going to be some farmers' cost of production. The coffee price is normally higher than the farmer's cost of production, but not all the time. There are times when farmers have to sell below their cost of production just because that's where the market price is. And if that lasts for an entire harvest, that could mean that a family doesn't have any income for a year. Then let's say a living income, however one might be defining that, is this dotted red line above here. So if we compare this dotted black line of mild Arabica price to the dotted red line of living income, we see that sometimes the sale price is below living income, but it's often above it. And people still drank coffee when the coffee price was above living income. So we know for a fact coffee will be sold for above the farmer's living income price because it normally is. So why don't we just take this dotted red line, which the actual price is normally above, and establish it as a floor, a minimum. So every time the actual price would go below the living income price, it has to stop right there and becomes a rigid floor. So we cannot go below this. That way, farmers never have to sell coffee below a price that can afford them a living income. This would be nice, but if you saw our previous two videos on price theory and how price is determined by supply and demand, you can probably already imagine that isn't that simple and doesn't really work. What would the price floor be? Cost of production? Whose cost of production? The highest cost of production? That would imply incentivizing inefficiency. The lowest cost of production? An average cost of production? That would mean that anyone with an above average cost of production would still have to be selling below their subsistence price. Cost of production plus living income? Living income where? This is going to vary quite a lot nationally and regionally. So here we have our supply and demand curve, again, as all the graphs we've looked at. Lower price, lower quantity supplied. Higher price, higher quantity supplied. Demand is downward sloping, so the lower the price, the more people want to buy. The higher the price, the less people want to buy. This is our equilibrium E1, quantity at that equilibrium quantity Q1, equilibrium price P1. P1 is $1 a pound, about where the price is today. Q1 is 80 million bags. This equilibrium price, P1, is below the cost of production plus living income for many coffee growers around the world. So what do? We set a minimum price that's going to be higher than the equilibrium price. Here's our price floor. So what happens to supply and demand when someone comes in and inserts a price floor above the equilibrium price? The new price floor is $1.50, a minimum FOB price for green coffee that allows all producers to cover their cost of production and earn a living income. So what happens? Suppliers are thrilled. They say, for $1, we'll give you 80 million bags. If you give us $1.50, going on up the supply curve here, Q2, we'll give you 100 million bags. Why would that happen? Because coffee growing immediately becomes a lot more profitable. People who are producing coffee are going to want to produce more of it. People who are producing carrots or tomatoes are going to say, wow, coffee is offering a much better margin than my carrots. I'm going to pull these up and plant some coffee. So because of this higher price, there's a greater incentive to produce and market coffee, so the supply of coffee rises. Up to this point right here. However, on the demand side, the opposite would happen. Buyers say, okay, at $1 a pound, I'll take 80 million bags. Someone comes along and says, no, now it's going to be $1.50 a pound. The man would say, ooh, $1.50 a pound, I can't take all 80 million then. At $1.50, I'm only going to take 60 million. Let's call this Q3. So now the situation we have is a difference between the quantity demanded versus supplied at an established price point. It's more expensive. I want to sell more of it. I want to buy less of it. This leads to a supply-demand imbalance. When supply is greater than demand, what we have is a surplus. So this difference right here in quantity, Q2 minus Q3, or this space right here, is our surplus quantity. What does it mean when there's a surplus? Well, it means some coffee is not sold. So what do you do with it? Do you throw it away? Stop. Because of all of the flaws with the assumptions involved in making that case, I'm just going to say it. That is Bush League finance bro economics. So this is as far as most analyses would have gone. This is as far as my analysis went 18 months ago. This is the same argument against raising minimum wages, or even having minimum wages for some folks. That these kind of things just don't work. The free market regulates itself like a force of nature. And anything that mortal humans might try to do to intervene in it will only make it worse. So just trust the free market, take whatever medicine it serves you, and stop complaining. But I'm no longer satisfied with that ending. And I hope you're not either. While I've got your attention, if you like this kind of critical analysis and examination, consider checking out my book, Cheap Coffee. You can find it at cheapcoffeebook.com. If you like this video format and want some more in-depth analysis that kind of builds on itself in a way that I can't do in these short one-off videos, check out my online course, Introduction to the Coffee Supply Chain. You can find that at Perfect Daily Grind Education. All these are linked in the description here. Stopping the analysis and leaving off at conclusions that are ideologically convenient is common today given the way information is distributed and controlled. It's also understandable because this is about the limit of a lot of basic economics training that someone might casually pick up. What other folks out there talking about minimum prices and minimum wages and the way they're taught in school may conveniently leave out that this entire explanation depends on the idea that there is an equilibrium to start with, or that equilibrium between supply and demand is even a thing that normally exists. The general theory of equilibrium states that the market price is the equilibrium price. Supply and demand always automatically meet each other, do a magical dance, and establish the price right where it should be so that all is right in the world. This is one of the principal tenets of neoclassical economics, also known as just economics, at most levels in a good portion of the world nowadays. When I studied economics in school, this is what they taught us. And they never even told us that this is only one approach to economics, that this is one set of theories, that it relies on assumptions that are highly debatable and many that are known to be completely unrealistic. I don't want to make this video why neoclassical economics is wrong. That would take way too long, and honestly, I don't know enough about the alternatives to do that in a coherent way. But let's just take a look at a few of these key assumptions that I find highly questionable and might change our conclusion a bit regarding setting a minimum price floor for coffee. The first of those assumptions is that the current price indicates equilibrium, because it does. Equilibrium would mean that physical supply equals physical demand. All of it. All of the supply equals all of the demand. Price chases fundamentals, fundamentals do not chase price. Because not all coffee is the same, we have differentials. These differentials ensure that different prices for different qualities, as indicated by their differentials above or below the base price, indicate the precise supply and demand of all of those diverse qualities. But they're all based on one general least common denominator product. And all of these sources of supply and demand can be synthesized into just two curves that we can see right here. Supply sloping upward, demand sloping downward. Where they meet, that's right where we want to be. But we know that is not the case. There are millions of supply and demand curves based on diverse conditions and tastes, with all different shapes, all changing every single day. Maybe the supply curve shown here is one that could exist. There might be another one like this, another one like this, another one like this. So we can basically cover this entire sheet with curves, and these may all be valid. These are all based on millions of different criteria that are also always changing all the time, causing all of these curves to change steepness and shape all the time. Demand is the same. We might have this one, we might also have this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. This turns into an absolute mess. So do you want to have a price floor for each one of these individual pairs, which also might be changing which curve goes with which other curve all the time? This theory of equilibrium also relies on the assumption that all buyers and sellers are rational actors. They have one sole focus. Sellers on maximizing profits, and buyers on maximizing utility. That's it. All of this is quantifiable. This is also highly suspect. What about non-monetizable utility? What about people's social needs and influence that can't really be assigned a price? I think it's unreasonable to build models that influence policies that really affect people's lives based on the notion that all people ever do is consume to maximize utility through products they can buy. This is obviously not the case, because as we all know, money can't buy me love. Although we might be getting closer to that. Think about the utility of food. Food costs money for a lot of us who can't make it ourselves, and it gives us nutrition. So if we were trying to maximize nutrition and minimize price, well, the obvious choice would be legumes, like beans and lentils. We would eat nothing but beans and lentils all the time. As a somewhat hyper-rational person myself, my diet does consist in large part of legumes. But there are, of course, non-monetizable factors. What's the opportunity cost of flatulence?
Was that a fart? I don't know.
No, really, I want to know. If you know it, let me know in the comments. I'm curious. I guess the answer is, it's different for everybody. Probably less for me than for you. But then how do we calculate just one utility curve for everyone? But come on, this isn't just fart jokes, as much as I like to work them into videos when I can. This is just an example that not all of our behavior and not all of the things that affect our behavior can be quantified in monetary terms. An absolutely rational utility maximizing consumer assumes that absolutely everything has a price and a cost, an opportunity cost that can be calculated and compared to other things. It assumes absolute individualism without any consideration of ethics. No social phenomena. All relations are exogenous. Perhaps most laughable of all, this theory assumes perfect competition. This means that all parties are price takers. No buyers and no sellers have any power to influence the price that they and their counterparts are subject to. There is no coercion, there is no bargaining power asymmetry. There is no situation where a buyer needs a seller more than a seller needs a buyer and can use that relationship to influence price or terms of trade in any way. We know, of course, that this is not the case in coffee or probably in just about anything. There's also perfect information, which is, of course, also not the case, not even close in coffee. And perfect information doesn't just mean everyone knowing the C price. It means knowing exactly what all potential buyers would be willing to pay and knowing what all potential sellers would be willing to receive for whatever they're buying or selling. I don't care how many blockchains you have, perfect information is not a reasonable assumption. The previous explanation misses a bunch of important things that I guess theoretically shouldn't exist. For example, it misses interdependence of different factors, like substitutability of one type of coffee for another, for example, and any kind of diversity of tastes or qualities when we boil them all down into just two curves. There are simultaneously millions of different supply and demand curves. They have different shapes and slopes, and they all react differently to millions of different circumstances, many of which are not measurable. At the very basic level by country, there's different supply available in each country. It changes independently of other countries. The demand for coffee from that country also varies. People have different tastes. Farmers have different production costs. Consumers have different budgets. This doesn't take into consideration time, the remembered past and the expected future that influences how people behave. Of course, people are not just consumers. Companies are companies, not people, but guess who makes up companies? People. We're not always rational based on the idea of utility maximization by consumption. The idea of utility and profit maximization doesn't consider ethical questions. If you pay these farmers below X, maybe they starve. So even a private company in a capitalist system that exists to make a profit may have an interest in paying farmers above the price at which they starve, even if it means buying less and having less to sell at a lower profit. That reminds me of what we were just talking about, price floors. Okay, I think I'm going to cut it off right there for this session and pick it up next time. That was our traditional orthodox takedown of price controls, such as a minimum price for coffee, minimum wage, etc. And then our heterodox takedown of that orthodox explanation. Some reasons why the assumptions that make that model work might be questionable. Next time we're going to pick back up right here and take a look at another scenario that's equally or possibly more plausible, relaxing those assumptions that could be questionable, under which some actors of the so-called free market are able to bend information and competition to their advantage. That's going to be a big one, so I hope you join me there again. Thanks as always for watching. See you next time.